As someone with a background in literature, and I literally went to college for this topic, it's something I find fascinating. When we look at the ideas of what could have been, or sometimes even what almost wasn't, but did end up being, those questions are very, very interesting to me. Those situations are one of the reasons why I do series like Rejected Media on this channel, where I look at things that either didn't materialize or ended up as deleted scenes or just end up as thrown out concepts. One of the most difficult series to look at, though, when it comes to those questions is James Bond. The 007 franchise has always been completely shrouded in mystery, whether it's from the handling of MGM, various filmmakers, various actors not, wanting to reveal the secrets behind the sauce. There are so many different deleted scenes we've never actually gotten to see that we've only heard described. One of them, for example, is the original ending of Quantum of Solace, where only little bits of it exist, which I covered in a previous video. And there are so many other rejected pitches, from games to movies to more. Now that said, when it comes to Bond, it's not just pitches, concepts, games, movies, or scenes that have been almost not part of the history or just not part of the history of Bond. It's also actors. There have been several actors and several different times where a perfect storm of events almost prevented one of the James Bonds that we actually got on screen, one of those actors, from embodying the role, and Daniel Craig is no different. So today I wanted to take a few minutes to look at the Daniel Craig era of Bond and how Craig almost wasn't Bond at all. Now, yes, we can take a look at things like how he didn't want to return between various installments because of stress on his family, but that's not the focus of today's video. Today's focus is why he almost turned down the role completely and didn't take up the mantle of Bond in the 007 franchise. So before we hop further into this, I do have a question of the day for you, which is there a rejected media pitch or a rejected scene, movie, game, whatever, something that didn't actually make it into reality that you would like for me to cover from really any series, but especially James Bond? I'd very much be interested to hear that, because it's one that's very hard to dig up information on. Now, recently Daniel Craig made the headlines, and it was through various interviews where he actually talked a little bit more about the history of James Bond in terms of his role in it and how it almost didn't happen. These various different interviews were with things like the Hollywood Reporters Awards Chatter podcast and even The New Yorker, where he revealed that he did originally pass on James Bond. Now, some of this was information that we knew already, but he got much more deep into why this was the case and what he was actually thinking about it. Now, when talking to the Hollywood Reporters Awards Chatter podcast, he was actually getting a little bit more into the details, and he said yes, for sure, when asked if he was nervous about accepting the Bond role, saying that's why I turned it down. I mean, I said no. There wasn't a script at the time, so again, my arrogance was unbelievable, but I was just like, well, until I see a script, I couldn't possibly make a decision. And it was fear, exactly what you're talking about, of that thing and many others, how it would flip my life. I was making a pretty good living at the time, so if I spent my life doing what I was doing at the time, I would have been more than happy. But it was really one of those things where, to be typecast as James Bond? Boo-hoo. And a fear of typecasting has stopped several actors from accepting prominent roles or has left them hesitant to do so throughout their careers. Even look at someone like Hugh Jackman taking up the role of Wolverine. One of the reasons why he did not want to play Logan in the first place was the idea of typecasting, was the idea of your life being turned upside down and never being able to get out of the shadow of that character. We've even seen that with other actors like Michael C. Hall, who have over the years struggled very much and done a lot of work, Andrew Garfield as well, to try and move their reputation out of one key role. Michael C. Hall doesn't want to just be known as Dexter, even though that is such an iconic role. Andrew Garfield loves Spider-Man, but he doesn't just want to be known as Peter Parker. I think this is something that a lot of creatives definitely deal with. When going on and talking more about this, though, as well, Craig revealed even more about it, that it was beyond just typecasting, and saying that he wanted to bring something else to the role that wasn't just what every actor had done before. He still wanted to be James Bond, he didn't want to warp and twist the character into something new, but he wanted to try and put some kind of new spin on it, saying, I'm interested in lots of things, but I wasn't interested in doing a copy of something, or representing something, or doing something that somebody else had done. And also, as an actor, the only thing that really gets me up in the morning is the emotional journey of a character. I knew who James Bond was. I'd done the research and I wanted to keep it within those parameters, but within those parameters, I wanted to explore vulnerability. I wanted to explore whether there was a human person inside of that. I didn't know how else to do it, and honestly, I mean, it sounds like this is what I was going to do, but I actually don't know how else to act. And this need to make Bond slightly different, it is one of the things that did lead to Bond, being a little more vulnerable in the Craig era. Now, a lot of people look at that and they think, well, what do you mean vulnerable? I mean, he's still like this macho alpha male type of character. Well, yes, but it's like peeling back the layers of that a little bit. The Craig era of Bond is often seen as a bit of a deconstruction of the character. It's one reason why people argue, hey, should we have that kind of version of it again? Or should we go back more to like the Brosnan type era or the Sean Connery type era, of this like larger than life spy where we're only seeing tiny glimpses of what's beneath the surface? Because you have to think back to Ian Fleming's original drafts of the character. It's not that we didn't see beneath the surface. It's not that he didn't go through character arcs, but it was that 24/7 he tried to keep those walls up. I think one of the differences with Craig's is sometimes we get to see a little bit more of an exposed look behind the walls of that character. Now, does that make him better or worse? No, but it does make that Bond a little bit unique, and that's why he's some people's favorite Bond and some people's least favorite Bond. There are definitely people who don't like that interpretation. This interpretation is also something I was talking to one of my channel members and friends, Seth, about, who is kind of our resident James Bond expert, read all the books multiple times, binges these movies constantly. And we were talking about Craig, and something he pointed out that's interesting is that Craig isn't the only one to have done this. Someone, for example, like Timothy Dalton, actually seemed to try and put this kind of spin on the character decades ago, but given the landscape of movies at the time, he wasn't really able to fully realize that vision of James Bond, that he wanted to take it in that direction for this more introspective, emotional Bond, but he did kind of lay some of the groundwork for that. Now, that's not to say that everybody else who played Bond other than Dalton and Craig played it like a stone-cold killer with no emotions at all. It's just that they often had those walls up. If you look at someone like Pierce Brosnan, for example, he's kind of at the end of that original movie James Bond era, where you could see glimpses, especially with characters from his past that he knew. Sometimes the women he was with, you'd see glimpses and moments of vulnerability, or even with his betrayal from Alec in GoldenEye, but he was such a seasoned and trained veteran agent that those walls were up most of the time. With Craig, we got to see those walls break down a little bit more and see that human side that he wanted to bring to the character, which doesn't make the rest of those versions not human. It's just a different take on the character, which, again, it's why some people love and some people absolutely hate this version of the character, because it does change some things. And another thing that's interesting about Daniel Craig's hesitance to take this role is also the ideas of who Bond was. While he did say that he understood that character, he respected it, he understood the parameters, when talking to the New Yorker, he also talked a little bit about who James Bond was and his persona, talking about how it was to play James Bond and one of the things that made him hesitant, saying that one of my biggest reservations about playing Bond would be the construct of masculinity. It was often very laughable, but you can't mock it and expect it to work. You have to buy into it. It's kind of the worst thing you can do as an actor, to start judging the character you're playing. And one of the things he's talking about is this wall that James Bond does put up. This idea that he has to 24/7 guard himself, that he has to be on the defensive. To a lot of people from the outside, when you're going into that role, it's kind of like, what's this guy's problem? Why is he so fake? But then when you actually look at it, it's not necessarily that he's so fake, it's that he's literally a spy. It's that his job is to be who he needs to be for his mission. And I think that that's something that Craig probably had to put himself into the shoes of to fully immerse himself in. going into that from his background of acting, of someone who played so many different roles, I'm sure that it's something that's different to do for each character. As not an actor myself, I can't speak to playing Bond, but I can say that that's probably something that every actor has to look at and say, okay, how is this going to work for me? How am I going to make this believable? Going back to his other interview that I thought was interesting, he really did feel this need to prove himself when it comes to Craig as an actor and as somebody with range. And I do think that that might be part of what led to some of the frustrations, along with the, very long sabbaticals from being around your family and being able to be a part of your family's lives. Also, this idea that everybody did kind of start just seeing him as James Bond, seeing him as the stereotypical alpha male macho man, and not really willing to look beneath the surface of who Daniel Craig was. When talking about this, he said, "I think I felt that I had to prove myself. And after a while, I just realized that I didn't have the energy to do that. It's not knocking movies like Defiance, because I'm very proud of them, but Bond is your life when you're doing it. Each movie is about 2 years out of your life. You're away from home for over 6 months, and the idea of fitting someone else in," and he's talking about playing these other movies and roles, "because of the need to prove to the world that I've got range, it's kind of ridiculous. So I stopped doing that. There's some movies I did do that I was incredibly proud of, but I was exhausted while doing those films. It was better to just concentrate on the Bonds." So one thing I find so interesting about this is it's not just the idea of typecasting that almost kept Craig away from the character, but also the understanding of who James Bond was, and I also think some of the stereotypes that people have put off on the character. I see this online all the time where people don't see Bond as a three-dimensional character, they see him as a two-dimensional caricature of masculinity or caricature of macho-ness, and they don't look beneath the surface. And I think that you can tell once Daniel Craig got into this role that he did start looking more beneath the surface of who Bond actually was. That he wasn't just the walls and the fronts he put up. And he wasn't just those things in any other actor's version either. But I would argue that when it comes to Craig, it was a much more in-depth look behind the curtain of those walls, being able to see a little bit more in-depth what was behind them than in a lot of previous outings, where Bond did have to keep those walls up 24/7. So I'm very interested to hear what you think in the comments down below about this. I think some people very harshly judge Craig. They see him as not, thankful for the role, or they see him as not having understood Bond. And while I could see some of those arguments with complaining about returning between different entries, or even saying that he didn't take the masculinity of the character seriously at first, I think that when you actually look at how he played this character, whether you like his version or not, and you look at how he talks about this character now, I truly do think he understands this version of James Bond. I do think that he understands the masculinity and understands this character and why he behaves the way he does. But you have to understand that this is also a character that took up so many years of his life that he had to get into that mindset and role of. And it's fascinating to look back and see that there was almost an era of Bond that just didn't exist. There was almost not a Daniel Craig deconstructionist type era of Bond. Some people probably would have loved that. They would have loved if we continued with the other, the older continuity, and I understand that because I love that continuity as well. But that said, it's just fascinating to look back and see that this almost didn't happen at all. If you enjoyed this video, you want to leave a like, subscribe, let me know what you think in the comments down below. I don't, cover James Bond every week, but I do cover it and circle back to it when I can because it is one of my favorite franchises out there. I have loved pretty much all the movies, so I guess I'm a bit of a special case. But if you want to support this channel, we also have other ways like Fortnite code DJAY123. We have our other channels like our podcast style Let's Play channel, Degenerate Plays, where we play through games together, talking, having fun. And also we do have our own store, CosmoBunny.shop, where we sell coasters, keychains, trays, and more from recycled, repurposed comic books, manga, magazine, and more paper. These are paper that was going to be thrown out, usually into landfills. We take that, we turn it into new art, and hey, Christmas, the holidays, all these things are coming up. Maybe you have a nerdy friend in your life, a fan of film, a fan of comics or manga or one of these things, and maybe they have a lot of different things in their life already. Well, why not get them something one of a kind on our store with discount code DJAY123 for 10% off your first purchase. We hope you have a fantastic day, and as always, everyone, stay shui.